The Astana peace process for solutions to the Syrian war recently held its 20th meeting. Why did Kazakhstan, which hosted the process for 7 years, say it is time to conclude this process? The United States has focused on Taiwan to curb China's growing economic power. It signed a bilateral talk framework last year, and now a bill is headed for the Senate with business as the ostensible goal. Indian PM Minister Narendra Modi's first state visit to the United States has concluded after public yoga sessions and questions about his government's human rights record. These are our stories in today's Daily Debrief. Has increasing United States presence in northern Syria and Turkey's reluctance to reduce its army's presence in the area come in the way of the high-level Astana peace process? The discussions earlier this week took place amid dramatic changes in West Asia, with Arab states and Syria keen to restore relations and Syria back in the Arab League. But the host of the dialogue since 2017, Kazakhstan, took the negotiating parties by surprise when it said another round of talks isn't needed. Let's ask Abdul from People's Dispatch to explain this development. Abdul, thanks for joining us. Now, Abdul, Kazakhstan has sprung something of a surprise at the end of the 20th meeting of the Astana peace process. Can you just try to explain why it might have taken the decision? What happens to the process now?
Well, it is difficult to explain why, because everyone was saying that it is unexpected.
Yes.
If you read the media reports, none of them were expecting something like that which happened. But the reasoning the Kazakhstan foreign minister was giving is primarily that whatever was the motive of the Astana process, so-called Astana process, it has been widely achieved since Syria has been reinducted into the Arab League.
Right.
And then there is a larger peace in Syria. The talks, which of course he is right that Astana process proposed de-escalation zones, and those zones have been established, and in those zones at least the violence has drastically reduced. And given the fact that all these things are happening, and by and large whatever was proposed during the process has been, there has been some development on the ground and there is the achievement. There is no need to continue this particular mechanism which has been devised among the four countries. And the UN-led process which is happening in Geneva should now take over. That's what the Kazakhstan foreign minister was suggesting. But it seems that there is also some kind of exhaustion in terms of the Kazakhstan being the host of this was the 20th round of talks,
right,
and there are more talks to be held. So it seems that the Kazakhstan government is also some kind of diplomatic exhaustion has reached to them. But if you see the latest report in TASS, the Russian media, they are saying that Kazakhstan has now reconciled its position as ready to host talks in future if all four countries involved give a joint appeal.
Abdul, is it possible to say that the peace process has concluded unless Turkish forces actually withdraw from northern Syria? And there was also discussion about the role the United States has played in this conflict. So could you talk about what happened in that front?
Of course, the peace process is far from being complete.
Yeah.
If you see, Turkey's occupation of Syrian land is one issue. That there are still anti-Assad forces controlling a part of Syrian territory, particularly the northwestern part of the Syrian territory, and it's a huge territory. Then there are Syrian refugees, which need more than around 5 to 6 million Syrian refugees are there all across the West Asia and in other parts of the world. They need of course, a large number of them will have to go back to Syria to kind of peace process to be completed. Apart from that, as you rightly pointed out, there is a US occupation of a large part of Syrian territory. There is an illegal military base inside Syria. Then, of course, there are SDF, the Kurdish forces, which is the reason that what Turkey claims that they have to intervene because there is SDF.
Yes.
They think that this is basically responsible for carrying out quote-unquote terrorist attacks inside Turkey. So that a large part of the northeastern part of Syria is still under their control, and the governance there is by and large run by them in collaboration with the US. So until all these areas are reintegrated with the Syrian government, the Syrian government will not say that the war is over and the peace is established. So these are the questions which need to be addressed: the U.S. occupation, the Kurdish factionalism, the occupation of Syrian land by Turkey, and the quote-unquote anti-Assad rebel forces. So there are so many things which need to be resolved before we say that the talks are over. As per the UN resolution, which talks about intra-Syria reconciliation,
yes,
which is also an important part. Even if all these, suppose we assume tomorrow there is an end of US occupation, end of Turkey's occupation, but there will be something left to be discussed about the re-establishing a legitimate Syrian political establishment, and that basically the Syrians have to decide, sit together and decide. So until all this happens, we cannot say that peace process is over.
And that's what this whole peace process in Astana was set up to supplement what the UN...
At least to create the ground for all these things. Even that background, the ground has not been created because Turkey is still there, Turkey and the US is still there. So
right,
if they withdraw, there is a possibility of then intra-Syrian talks, a much more stronger possibility that it will be than what it is today. So until that is achieved, Astana process is still relevant.
All right, Abdul, thanks very much for that update. On the face of it, the US House of Representatives has cleared a bill focused on trade with Taiwan, but the sponsor of the bill has said it's really about protecting US interests in the Indo-Pacific. The bill says the US Trade Representative will have to show future negotiating texts to Congress before other countries get to see them. It makes future agreements contingent on the President releasing the text 60 days before signing them. There's lots more detail in the story, which Anish from People's Dispatch will share with us. Anish, so in a nutshell, what is this bill all about?
Yeah, so the bill is essentially, on the face of it, it's basically an attempt to basically streamline processes related to trade between Taiwan and United States. Now, one of the reasons why this bill is quite significant is because this will be like one of the first treaties that the two entities, we have to call here entities because let's be very honest, the whole existence of whatever government exists in Taiwan is still a disputed, internationally disputed matter. But yeah, so the fact that these two entities will be signing a proper treaty and not a memorandum, which was usually, or an MOU, which was usually the standard practice when it comes to trade or any kind of deals between the two entities, was something significant. It kind of shows that the US is going to start treating Taiwan in a way that it will represent a country more or less for US policymakers. And that is obviously concerning. The matters of the bill is not necessarily that problematic because it basically deals with trade and tariffs, and it doesn't really change much. It actually gives more power to the Congress than policymakers on matters of Taiwan, at least. And so, and there will obviously be, more congressional involvement in future talks. But the implications that it is going to bring in is something that is far more significant and will have a much wider impact, even with US foreign policy as a whole.
Right, Anish. So are you saying it's basically a sort of dance that Taiwan and the United States are doing vis-a-vis China?
I mean, exactly what it is, because at this point, this is sort of a tacit recognition of Taiwan, being entitled to an independent foreign policy of its own, which is something that can have its own set of implications. Now, despite what we keep reading in mainstream news reports, Taiwan is not just an island that is being claimed by China. It is an ideological dispute that begins with the end of the Chinese Civil War, where the nationalist Kuomintang government, led by Chiang Kai-shek, was put into Taiwan, and they had to recede to that and create a rump state of its own. And the whole one China policy comes and has at its very foundation the fact that you have to recognize either one of them as China, and not just like China and Taiwan. So
Right.
you're essentially asserting the fact that when you, as a sovereign nation, recognize either one of them, you're recognizing their sovereign claims and territorial claims as well. So at the time when most of the world, like pretty much almost all of the world, except for a handful of other small countries, pretty much all of the world recognizes the People's Republic of China as the China, and which with that carries the implication that China has sovereign rights over Taiwan as well, and that it is a matter of dispute, an internal dispute between the two entities. Now, so that is the reason why the United States does not have an embassy in Taiwan. Even the signing of this treaty, which was signed in June 1st, actually was done by an American institute in Taiwan, and not really an embassy or a diplomatic a mission in Taiwan. So the fact that they are going to and even the language of it, there is no mention of Republic of China. And obviously, they can't, recognize Republic of China because they had forgot that sort of recognition in the 1970s as well. But the fact that they are going to now start deciding on sovereign claims of another country and deciding what kind of trade policies and foreign policies that country is entitled to, that is the more concerning part. And this is obviously an indication that the US is ready to start, push all boundaries of this one China policy and the kind of status quo that exists across the straits between these two entities. And obviously, it is going to start putting itself into the disputes, as we have seen already with military confrontations in the region. But now this is far more substantial, because trade relations and a proper trade treaty means that you're going to assert that this, whatever it exists, like even the US foreign policy makers do not really have a definition of what Taiwan is or what the government in Taiwan is. You're going to trade with it. And you're also not only going to trade with it, but deal with it like it's a sovereign entity with its own tariff policy and everything. And that is problematic, even for most Taiwanese to begin with. Most of them do not identify as a separate identity. They identify as Chinese to begin with. And even they want a Chinese reunification, whatever their political stand be. So this goes against, all sorts of common sense in many ways. And this is pretty much an attempt to keep pushing boundaries and keep provoking China at the moment.
Right, Anish, thanks a lot for that update, and thanks for joining us. Are India and the United States close friends again, or have geopolitical changes made it necessary for leaders of both countries to make a big show of their partnership? With Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi concluding his first state visit to the United States, we asked Prabir Purkasa, the editor-in-chief of NewsClick, what the important benchmarks to evaluate this visit are. He joins us now in the studio. Prabir, you were on the show speaking on Debrief about the visit of the Indian Prime Minister to the United States, his first state visit just a couple of days back. Has the visit gone along predicted lines?
These visits are always scripted, so it's not that something new really happens in the visit, which was not anticipated earlier. This is also in the context that India now does see itself as a player. Now, India was a player always in international affairs, particularly in the non-alignment phase. Nehru and India, both, even after Nehru, were important. But this phase, after that, this phase of India's politics, India's foreign policy has been somewhat clouded. We don't know which way it is going. At one point, it looked like it was getting very close to the United States. It happened even with Manmohan Singh, when there was a lot of India-US friendship talks being uttered, defense deals being reached, a nuclear agreement being signed, and so on. And then again, this time it has come up. But in the context of what's happening now, it's also, let's face it, there is no unipolar moment in the world anymore. You know, unlike the 90s when the Soviet Union had collapsed, the socialist bloc wasn't there. There was a feeling that the US was now the sole hegemon. They were talking about 100 years of hegemony, the new Roman Empire, all of that was in the offing. So that has collapsed pretty quickly. In 20, 30 years, that phase seems to be over. And in the Ukraine war, the expectation that the US might have had that Russia will collapse hasn't happened. So therefore, India becomes an important player in two ways. One is Asia is the next century. That's very clear.
Right.
It is the largest continent, and Eurasia is a landmass. The European part is smaller. The Asian part is much bigger. There's South Asia, there is China, there is Central Asia, there is Southeast Asia, there is West Asia. All these are going to become important. So therefore, if that is so, then India becomes a pivotal power. And also because its economy is now the 5th largest in the world, if you take PPP terms, but it is going to be the 5th largest economy anyway. So given that, and the fact that Russia is selling a lot of oil to India, so India's position becomes more important, that if it goes whole hog with the United States, then what happens? If it goes against China, then what happens? Or if India does do what it is doing currently, it's keeping its relationship with Russia, it still has military relationship as well as buying stuff from Russia. It's also trying to keep its one foot in the BRICS, but it's also, on the other hand, wants to come close to the United States, particularly to offset China, because that's the border tension that India and China have. They see themselves as protagonists in Asia. So that is the other part. Now, for India is also what is it that the United States can give us? Therefore, the question of technology. That's something which has been figuring out this. For the United States, it's how to balance China and how to see whether the Russia-India axis, including the military one, because India buys a lot of military stuff from hardware from Russia, whether that can be weakened and the US can become a substitute for that. So this is, I think, the larger context of what we see. But of course, there are irritants in the process, and one of them has come up. What about India's internal democracy? The fact that the minorities are under attack, Christians as well as Muslims. All these questions have been raised in the United States. There were demonstrations taking place. Barack Obama said this in an interview. So all those things are also there. So that is why this issue has a significance beyond just India and the United States. At the same time, for India, it has local significance. And that part of it is that Mr. Modi has gone and he has been received in this particular way. Red carpet has been rolled out. He's doing deals. Those are all for internal consumptions.
Right.
You know, largely for internal consumptions. But nevertheless, let's face it, the geostrategic balance, which you have discussed a number of times, is changing. And India is now a player who all countries, all the major players have to take account of. And Modi's visit is therefore really a sign of that.
A sign of that. Is it also the United States' interest to actually, you know, they keep mentioning Indo-China region, their interest in the Indo-Pacific and so on and so forth. So it's more America's interest to counterbalance China in some way than India's really to do that.
Well, you know, if India wants to be a big player, it's going to play everywhere. So it doesn't think that's restricted only to China. It thinks that it can now become a global player. The problem with becoming a global player is that how strong is your economy?
Absolutely.
Now, China's economy is much bigger than India. So therefore, it is the much bigger player. And even on India and China trade terms, we import a lot more from China than what we export to China. And it's basically also industrial goods.
Yes.
So looking at all of that, it's not easy to replace China. But if you do what now the United States is talking about, friendshoring, not disengaging, but risk avoiding,
Yes.
all of those terms,
Yes.
which means can we shift part of our supply chain to India? India, South Asia, Southeast Asia, all these things are in the discussions. So this is something that the United States is interested in. And of course, quid pro quo is then offering it some technology, some industry to be shored here, and of course, buying arms, as you know. That's US's biggest game. In this, we have had the aero engine, General Electric at the Indian side lining up for aircraft engines. So let's see how it goes. But neither side is going to commit beyond what their national interests are.
Sure.
And it is clear that Indian national interests at the moment are also retaining its strategic maneuverability, at the same time looking at the United States as a counterbalance to China and a long-term relationship with the United States, because Russia is relative to United States and China, the weaker player.
Sure.
Therefore, yes, we have a military interest with China, with Russia, because we buy arms from there, and also fertilizer import, oil import, all these are there. So yes, that interest is there, but India is also looking to see, looks like, the strategically can it play footsie with both. And that's what the attempt is. While with the case of China, it's very clear. It is a competition. Okay, it's a strategic competition, even though China is much stronger, partly or mainly because of its economic size. But Russia, yes, we don't want to break our relations, but we'd like to enlarge it with becoming a partner to United States in all of this. So I think it is trying to find our feet in this new scenario, particularly after the Ukraine war, in which a strategic shift is taking place globally, and the talk about the multipolar world is, I think, much more real. The unipolar world is actually over. And that's why the talk about BRICS, the Shanghai Cooperation, all of these are again coming to the front. And I think we are going to see a lot of changes in the near future. But you know, a lot of the Modi visit is also for internal consumption.
Yes, Prabir, I wanted to ask you this. I remember in the 90s, even in the 2000s, when there was a state or an official visit, especially to the United States, the Indian representatives there would try to sell the large domestic audience for products and services which would come from. Now the Indian people in general, the demographic advantage, etc., is not mentioned. It's more at the high level of trade deals involving, you know, big industries and exchange of goods, arms. So does that say something about the state of the Indian economy?
Well, I don't know whether, you know, we should get into that. I was really talking about something else altogether,
okay,
which is that how is it being sold here? This is
right.
Modi doing yoga, becoming
Yes.
Vishwaguru. So there's a domestic element to all this campaign.
Right.
So it's a very choreographed visit for that. And there was a press conference, but only one question was asked. Okay.
Yes.
And he gave a long answer. Okay.
Which, yes.
So it was not a short answer. He gave a very long answer.
Yes.
And he reiterated. After Barack Obama's interview, it was clear the question of democracy was going to be asked, and he sort of prepared his answer on the ground. Now, it was assertions of different kinds. You know, it's important that in 10 years, he's never given a 9 years as a prime minister, he's never given a press conference in India. Mm-hmm. But he did do one in the United States, that also one question, yes, and a 10-minute answer. So I think these are interesting sidelights to the visit, and I suspect it is also, in Modi's view, also for the Indian people. What does he show to the Indian people? And also, don't forget that there is an expat population of Indians there, and also wooing them for asserting their influence back in India. So I think those are interesting sidelights. So there is this, shall I say, a kind of a holding a big spectacle in the US for the domestic audience also involved in this.
Right, Prabir. Thanks very much for joining us. And that's all we have for today. Thanks very much for watching Daily Debrief. We'll be back with another show tomorrow. And for our regular updates, you can follow us on social media and you can see our website, peoplesdispatch.org. Thanks very much for watching.